decided to follow Jesus.
Make sure you're ready with food.
We're going to go get some. We're in my There's the eggs. Right, in the chair. Get in the chair.
Get in the chair.
And you can bet that there are thousands of pastors with furrowed, sweated brows, prayerfully seeking to bring a fresh interpretation to this reading that has been faithfully read across the millennia in the churches. Some of the sermons this morning might be about Mary Magdalene, others might be about Peter, others might be about John, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Of course, there's always opportunities to focus on the role of the angels, and of course, there are many sermon possibilities around Jesus and what the resurrection means. But today, I want to focus on something else. I'd like to specifically focus on the stone that closed Jesus' tomb. Burial tombs at the time of Jesus were carved into the hillside, and the stone or the rock around the hillside around Jerusalem was limestone. It was several different kinds of limestone. And we're not sure exactly for sure where Jesus' tomb was, but we can say that it was cut out of limestone rock into the hillside. And covering the tomb was a stone made out of limestone. Now I have a question, I have a confession I have to make. I had to look up the difference between a rock and a stone. So if you already know the difference between a rock and a stone, then you can kind of chuckle to yourself that I really had to look it up. And so what I learned in my 5 minutes of research about the difference between a rock and a stone is a rock is a natural formation, large or small, as a stone is something that has been carved or cut or shaped or honed by human hands. In this case, the entrance to Jesus' tomb was a stone. It had been cut and it had been shaped by human hands. And it was a stone that was intended to keep Jesus away. If we look at the scripture right before our text today, we'll see that the religious leaders were so paranoid that Jesus was going to come back in 3 days as he had prophesied, that they talked the guards into sealing the stone to keep Jesus away. But our scripture this morning tells us on this Easter day that Mary found the stone rolled away. The stone cut and shaped by human's hands so long ago didn't keep Jesus from appearing to Mary Magdalene, to the disciples, and to many others in the days that followed his resurrection. And so on this Easter morning, I invite you to consider this question. What stone or stones do you cut and you hone that you put in the way of your relationship with Jesus? And here are some possibilities I would invite you to reflect on. I know you can't see this very well, but the first stone is the stone of irrelevance. Research studies show that the number of Americans who do not identify themselves as religiously affiliated continues to grow at a rapid pace. A recent Pew Research study said that 1/5 of the U.S. public and 1/3 of adults under 30 are religiously unaffiliated. So the question is, has Christianity become irrelevant to modern life? To that, I can only respond with some considerations for you this morning. I invite you to consider that around the world, 32% of the whole world's population, 2.1 billion people, are Christian. It is by far the largest religion around the world. And in the last 100 years, the number of Christians has quadrupled. Maybe there's something there. And if you look at the role of Christianity in shaping civilizations, it has played an important role, particularly in shaping our Western civilization. You know, and in the roots of our own country, you know, the leaders of the various colonies and the states, and ultimately the founding fathers, were steeped in biblical thinking. And they turned to the Bible for examples, and they turned to the Bible for confirmation of the government that they were designing. The influence of the Bible can be seen in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the checks and balances that are in the Constitution, and at least half a dozen of the amendments. And more recently, in the last 100 years, 2 of the most successful and powerful social reformers, Martin Luther King Jr. and Mohandas Gandhi of India, were directly and specifically shaped in their actions by Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Consider this also, that faith and science are intertwined in the true quest for knowledge and truth. That true Christian faith is not threatened by science. While science asks the questions of what and how, faith answers a completely different set of questions. It answers the questions of the existential questions of why. Why am I here? Why are you here? Why are we all here? And for what purpose? Both of these sets of questions are important, and both of these sets of questions are intertwined. The rock of relevance. Another stone that we put in the way of Jesus, that we hone and we cut, is the stone of unanswered prayer. Lindsay O'Connor shares this story. While giving birth to our 5th child, I had serious complications. I underwent 2 surgeries, had a massive blood loss, and severe lung damage. My brain was damaged too. I was put in a medically induced coma for 6 weeks. The doctors wouldn't promise that I would wake up whole, or that I would wake up at all. But eventually I did emerge from my coma, and my body began to heal. So did my mind. A miracle, those around me explained, but it didn't feel much like a miracle to me. I put on a brave face. I didn't talk much about waking from a coma, barely knowing my own name, and not even remembering that I'd even had a baby. I didn't bore people with the stories of learning how to walk, or learning how to eat with a fork, or even to brush my teeth. And no one saw the many moments just like this one, where I sat alone, wondering if I'd ever go back to my life as a writer. I didn't dare utter the words aloud that had been on my mind for these many months. Where are you, God? Where were you in the delivery room when everything went wrong and I nearly died? Where were you when my fragile newborn baby, Carolyn, looked for her mom and couldn't find her mom? Carolyn was now a toddler, and I still wasn't sure that we bonded. Where were you, God, when the waves of anxiety and depression kept crashing over me in my life? My whole family was turned upside down. I was in the hospital for 107 days. My husband, Tim, ran himself ragged, working and caring for the children and spending time at my bedside. My oldest daughter, Jacqueline, withdrew from college to take care of the newborn Carolyn. The older kids took care of the younger kids. Even after I was discharged, I knew that my illness placed a huge burden on my family. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Pointlessness of it. Really, God, where were you? Sitting at my desk, all I had was questions, and I gazed out over the mountains, and the sun was so intense. The questions and doubts that filled me cast dark shadows, and I wondered if I would ever be okay. And then, so quickly and subtly that I hardly perceived it, everything changed. Yes, everyone's life had been upended, but that didn't mean that God was absent. Was there any surer sign of God's presence than the love that grew between my daughter Jacqueline and the baby Carolyn? Or the love that kept Tim by my side? Or the love that buoyed our children and inspired our friends and our family to take care of us? God was there even in my questions. Otherwise, if he hadn't been there, I wouldn't have anyone to argue with. My mistake was not asking God to show himself in the midst of chaos. That's only natural when you're in distress. My mistake was assuming that God is present only when we can feel God is near. That God's presence is much deeper than that. God enters the darkness with us. God stays by our side. And God is there when we emerge from the darkness, even when we don't see him right away. I saw God now, as bright and clear as the sun on the hills. The rock of unanswered prayer. The stone of unanswered prayer. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a young man named Jake. And this spring, Jake is graduating from college, and he's marrying his high school sweetheart. In our conversation, he described his belief system as somewhere halfway between agnostic and atheist. His family life had never included going to church or participating in religious events as a kid. And whenever he had gone to church with a friend, or gone to a youth group, or gone to a Christian event, he left feeling flat and untouched. I have another very close friend that lives in Dallas, and she walked as a young woman away from the church for many, many years. And recently, in the last few years, she's found a new faith community and renewed her faith. Because you see, as a young bride, The parish priest told her that she had to stay in her abusive marriage that was suffocating and strangling her.
I have decided to follow Jesus.